All right, I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. Thank you all for joining me today. I'm here to talk about, wait 1 second. Sorry, everyone. I'm just going to turn off my camera for the presentation part so you can all focus on my words. Okay. Thank you for joining me. Sorry about that. I'm here to talk about how to select and work with the conservator on conservation projects. Some of you might be here because your organization is interested in applying for a Minnesota Historical and Cultural Heritage Grant for a conservation project. Some other people might be here because I mentioned this presentation in yesterday's Ask a Conservator event. Either way, the presentation should be helpful for someone who is hoping to hire a conservator for a grant-based project or a personal project. There will be time for questions and answers at the end. For those who don't know me, my name is Megan, and I'm the Outreach Conservator at the Minnesota Historical Society. My specialty is helping people take care of the things they want to preserve by sharing advice, resources, helping with the Legacy Grants program, and more. There are lots of ways I can provide conservation expertise and help to you for free, but my role is not to perform conservation treatments for you or to do a risk assessment of your collection storage area, for example. When an in-depth conservation project comes up, you need to hire a conservator for the task. So here's what I'll cover this afternoon. What is a conservator? Why do you need a conservator? How do you find a conservator? And finally, what to expect while working with one. Let's start with the most basic question. What is a conservator? Conservators are specially trained professionals who are entrusted with the physical preservation of works of art, history, and other valued items. It's typical for conservators to be trained with a master's degree and also usually many years of internship and fellowship experience. Hands-on experience is just as important as classroom learning for a conservator. For this reason, some conservators have been trained on the job through apprenticeships, although this is less common now. Conservation training incorporates science, history, and craftsmanship. A conservator tries to understand deterioration on a chemical, microscopic level. They use science to select treatment methods that will safely improve the condition of the artifact without causing any unintended harm now or in the future. They use history to understand the context and materials used so that any treatment will be true to the nature of the object. And of course, they use craftsmanship to safely conduct the delicate work of conservation treatment, which often takes place under microscopes or other forms of magnification. In grad school or even earlier, conservators choose a specialization. Most specializations are in material types. The common ones are books and paper, textiles, paintings, furniture, objects, photographs, or even clocks. Some conservators specialize in what is called preventive conservation, which refers to broad actions related to environmental control, pest management, risk management, storage methods, etc., that prevent damage from occurring to objects and collections in the first place. Finally, one of the most important hallmarks of a conservator is that they adhere to the ethical guidelines of the profession, which are laid out in the Code of Ethics and Guidelines for Practice of the American Institute for Conservation. What are professional conservation ethics? These lay out the standards and best practices that all professional conservators should follow, kind of like the Hippocratic Oath of Conservation. I've laid out some of the points from the code here. The conservation professional should practice within the limits of competence and education. They should select materials that will not cause harm to the cultural property they're treating, either now or in the future. They must thoroughly document examination and treatment by creating permanent reports, and they must minimize risk to themselves, coworkers, the public, and the environment. They must always act with full consent of the owner or caretaker of the cultural property. for example, with signed treatment agreements. And they must only recommend treatment that is suitable for preserving the physical, cultural, or aesthetic characteristics of an object. There are also other guidelines for practice: that conservation treatments should be reversible when possible, that restoration should be distinguishable from original materials, and other specific ethical practices that have developed over many decades of professional discussion. When a conservator follows these guidelines and code of ethics, they are able to apply for a peer-reviewed status within the American Institute for Conservation, known as a professional associate. It's good practice to look for a conservator with professional associate status when looking to hire, but at a minimum, you should be looking for someone who states outright somewhere on their website, contract, or resume that they abide by the AIC Code of Ethics and Guidelines for Practice. Let's talk about the kind of projects that you should hire a conservator for. This slide has a list of the types of projects a conservator can help you with. In some cases, there are also other museum professionals who can help you with these tasks. But if you're working with something really valuable, and that can be monetary value, sentimental, or educational value, anything that you really, really want to preserve for future generations, you should work with a conservator. So that includes preventive conservation planning, like the General Conservation Assessment and Long Range Preservation Plan, which is a structured grant offered through the legacy grants. Collections condition assessments, conservation treatment, matting and framing or mount making for really valuable items, emergency planning and disaster recovery for your collection. Additionally, if you're doing construction work that affects historic architectural decorative arts like stained glass windows, murals, and mosaics, that work should include a conservation professional at some point. Now quickly I'll run through a few types of projects that, even though they seem like conservation projects, they don't actually require a conservator to be your main consultant. So collection storage and rehousing projects are, the purpose of them are to improve the long-term preservation of your collection by improving the way that your objects live, basically. You can hire a conservator to help you with that, but you can also work with museum consultants, your museum staff, even trained volunteers. If you wanted to do a rehousing project for something that was really big or really valuable, again, you could work with a conservator. Pest control and integrated pest management. Again, it could be designed and implemented by a conservator, but if it's building wide and really serious, you might actually want to go with a pest control specialist. In normal situations, you can do pest monitoring on your own, again with museum staff or with trained volunteers. HVAC evaluation and design should be completed by mechanical engineers with experience in museums. HVAC installation can be performed by HVAC contractors. Museum lighting design is usually best left to a lighting designer with museum experience, and installation can be done by a qualified electrician. What a conservator can help you with for these projects is to help you plan which one is the most urgent for your collection through preventive conservation planning. So why do you need a conservator? Well, need is a strong word. The Minnesota Historical Society is not going to come and throw you in history jail if you hire the wrong specialist for your project or try to do it yourself. Not only that, but sometimes conservators mess up, and sometimes they get into big public stats about how to properly treat a painting. All that aside, hiring a professional conservator for your conservation project will quite literally prevent this type of thing from happening to you. I'm referring, of course, to these restoration debacles that you have probably seen on the news. One of them is just from last week. When non-specialists try to preserve or repair something that's beyond their experience or expertise, you can have really big disasters. When you hire a professional conservator, something this bad won't happen. Why not? Because, again, conservators have special training and lots of hands-on experience. They typically know what to do and what not to do when preserving and repairing cultural heritage because that's their whole job. When it comes to conservation surveys and preventive conservation work, conservators have the experience to look at the whole picture and prioritize the work that needs to come first based on an understanding of conservation principles and the collection materials and object conditions involved. Most importantly, they follow the professional code of ethics, which I'm really hammering in, but it's really important because it means that you and the conservator are always on the same page about what's happening or what's going to happen. They create permanent records so that people in the future can assess and understand and even reverse what was done. And they work within their own expertise and experience to ensure that no harm comes to their charge now or in 50 years' time based on current scientific knowledge. Let's say I've convinced you to hire a conservator, or you already knew you wanted to hire a conservator, and you've just been waiting and waiting for me to get to the nitty-gritty about how to hire one. Sorry about that. So where do you find a conservator? There are two pretty good resources online where you can search for conservators in Minnesota and nationally. They are the Preservation Specialists Directory and the Find a Conservator tool. Let's start with the Preservation Specialists Directory. This is a database on the MNHS website. You can use it to search for a variety of different preservation professionals, including historic architects, mechanical engineers, contract historians, and conservators. You simply click on the drop-down menu titled Specialties, seen here, and then you select Conservators Fine Art and Object and hit Apply. A list of consultants will then appear. These consultants have self-selected to be in this directory, and they aren't vetted or approved by me or by the Historical Society. Don't assume that everyone on this list is a professional conservator who follows the EAC Code of Ethics. Follow through and make sure. Additionally, this database includes all different types of specialties of conservators: objects, paper, textiles, etc. To learn more about a consultant, you can click on their company name to learn more. You can see that it's a hyperlink. So I'm just going to click on the first entry here, which is Braun Art Conservation. You can see contact information, and in the notes, it states that the specialty of this conservator is in 3D object conservation. If you want someone to restore a quilt or your family Bible, this isn't the right specialty. If you want someone to restore your family's silver, this is the right specialty. If you're ever unsure of what specialty of conservator you need, you can always reach out to me and I can point you in the right direction. On to the Find a Conservator tool. This is a database run by the American Institute of Conservation, and it contains the peer-reviewed professional associates nationwide. You can narrow your search by zip code and specialty. Here you can see the list of specialties that you can search by. I'm going to select the zip code of the Minnesota History Center and then try to find some local book and paper conservators. So here we go. On the right, you can see the results page. On the website, they're sorted by name rather than by the company title. Again, these people all have peer-reviewed status as conservators, and you're able to sort by specialty, but you still want to be careful when hiring to make sure that they have the experience and expertise you want. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. When you click on a person's name, which is again a hyperlink, I'm going to click on the first person's name here. You'll see more details about them, including contact information, websites, specialties, and sometimes they've filled out biographical information. All right. Now you know where to find a conservator. Here's some more information to help you choose the right one for your project. Some important things to consider are, first, make sure that they're either a professional associate or that they understand and abide by the professional code of ethics. Second, think about the type of project that you're doing. Do you need a preventive conservator or do you need a book conservator? Do you want to hire someone local so that they can provide ongoing support? Or is your project so specialized that there are only 2 conservators in the entire country who have the expertise to take it on? It's also worthwhile to take a look at their portfolio to see what kind of projects they've worked on in the past. Many conservators have online portfolios now, although they might be behind a password for privacy reasons. If you can't find a conservator's online portfolio on their website, or they don't have a website, feel free to reach out via other methods to ask for some examples of their previous work. Here's an example of an online portfolio for a conservator. You can click around on this page to look at examples of their work, and also you can read over their resume. A portfolio like this will give you a good idea of the experience and qualifications of the conservator that you're looking to hire. But again, if you can't find something like this on the internet, you can also just reach out to the conservator by email to ask for this kind of information. They should provide you with previous work and with a resume when you ask. So there's also a really useful resource you can look at called the Guide to Hiring, provided by the American Institute of Conservation. There's a link to it here, but it's also linked to on the Find a Conservator database that I shared earlier. This resource has a lot of good tips, but I particularly like this list of questions that you can ask when you reach out to a conservator. It's totally acceptable and it's good practice to ask some or all of these questions to get a good sense of who you're hiring and whether they're qualified for your project. Sometimes you can find the answers to these questions on their website or their resume. The questions are, what is your background? What training have you completed? How long have you been a practicing professional? What is the scope of your practice? Is conservation your primary activity? What is your experience in working with my kind of object? What is your involvement in professional organizations? What is your availability? And what are your references and previous clients? So when you are reaching out to a conservator, it's good to ask questions about them to make sure that they have the right qualifications for your project. But you also need to be able to explain your project to them so that they know whether it's something that they want to take on. So, no matter what kind of project you're doing, it's good to think about reaching out to them with a description of the project that's really fleshed out with the 5 W's: who, what, why, when, and where. Who is who are you? Are you an individual with an interest in preserving family history? Are you a museum? Are you some other kind of nonprofit? Or are you a private organization? All of this can make a difference in what will happen next. What do you want done? What kind of project is this? Do you want someone who can give an overall conservation assessment for your collection? Do you need a condition survey of the books in your library? And then how many books would that be? Do you want someone to do a conservation treatment of your sculpture of Michelangelo? How big is it and what does it look like? Why is another important question. The kind of work the conservator will propose might be different if you're preparing something to put it on display, or if you're stabilizing it to put in long term storage, or if the thing needs to travel somewhere, or if you need a more in depth condition report so that you can apply for a grant. When do you want this done? If you're on a strict schedule, it's good to be upfront. Conservators often have work backlogs and busy schedules, and conservation is often slow, time consuming work. Try to be flexible with timing, but state clearly what you need. If you're working within a grant that needs to be completed within a year, say it right away. And finally, where are you located? Is the conservator going to need to travel to work on location? Have you considered how the object will move from location A to location B to be treated and then back again? Conservators can help with both of these things, and many conservators will travel for a job, but they'll factor in the cost of travel and lodging into their proposal and cost estimate. So let's talk a little bit about cost, the cost of hiring a conservator. Conservation is not inexpensive. It's detailed, painstaking work by its very nature, and practitioners have a high level of expertise, and they also have high costs to maintain laboratories, the fancy equipment that they need to preserve things, and the expensive materials that they use in treatments. Here are some quick stats from a 2014 compensation survey of conservators in private practice. Treatment work is commonly offered at an hourly fee. Other popular hourly fee-based services include writing reports, surveys and assessments, examination without treatment, and travel time. About 1/3 of conservators will not charge for preliminary examination and estimates. Billing rates span a wide range, but tend to stay in the $100 to $120 per hour span. Also, about 62% of conservators in private practice have a daily rate. The overall median daily rate is $820, but median rates rise with company size, peaking at $1,200 among those with 2 to 5 employees. Now, if you're a 501c3 nonprofit, an educational institute, a unit of state or local government, or a federally recognized tribe, you're eligible to apply for a Minnesota Historical and Cultural Heritage Grant to hire a conservator to help you preserve items in your care. There are other grants available nationally too. If you're an individual, hiring a conservator can seem overly expensive, but you can think of it as an investment in the future. By hiring a conservator, you're ensuring that your most treasured items will last for future generations. And it's important to know that there are lots of things that you can do yourself to ensure that items are safe and likely to last a long time. You can always reach out to me if you need help deciding whether or not you need a conservator's help. On this slide, I've outlined the typical process for a conservation treatment project. You should expect to go through each of these steps in roughly this order, depending on the object and your location. The conservator will need to start by examining the object. If necessary, this can be done through photographs, but it's preferable for the conservator to see the object in person. After the examination, the conservator will write up a condition report and treatment proposal. Depending on the circumstances, this can be a preliminary document that may get fleshed out with more details once the conservator sees the object in person. You'll receive a contract with an estimate for the cost and timeline of treatment. The cost estimate might be presented as a range rather than a specific number, because things can often change once you actually start working on a treatment. Sometimes it's simpler than you thought, and sometimes it's more complicated than you thought. Often, the initial examination and treatment proposal will be complimentary or at a low fee. Alternatively, they might charge the examination at the end as part of the total cost of treatment if you proceed with treatment. If you have a really large, complex object, like a train, or an extremely valuable object, like a Da Vinci painting, or maybe something less expensive, but still really valuable. And also, if you're hoping to apply for a grant to pay for the cost of treatment, you'll need to have a more detailed condition report and treatment proposal to start off with right off the bat. This could cost more money up front, but it's worthwhile because you're more likely to get an accurate cost assessment of treatment, and you'll have much more documentation about your object, which is really important in the future when you're looking back at the condition of the object. If you're looking at a grant for treatment, you can also apply for a grant for a detailed condition report and treatment proposal. That can be the first step in your process, and I actually recommend that this is how you should proceed. It's the best way to get all of the documentation you need to be really successful with your grant application. It's important for both you and the conservator to sign the treatment proposal so that everybody is on the same page about what's going to happen to the object. It's possible that the conservator will propose something that you don't think is necessary or that you're surprised or confused by, so you can reach out for clarification. You can also reach out to more than one conservator, because conservators don't always agree on the best strategy for treatment. What you can't do is you can't take a look at the cost estimate and say you don't want to pay for them to do the documentation of the treatment, because this is, again, an hourly fee, and they have to do all of the photography and write up everything that they did to the object. Sometimes people come to conservators and ask them just to do the treatment without any of the documentation so they can save some money. But this goes against conservation ethics, and so they will not agree to do that. A note on getting your object to the conservator. The best option is usually to hand deliver it yourself. In some cases, you can get the conservator to pick it up for you. There are also professional movers, art handlers, for example, or window specialists that can help you remove, package, and safely move a stained glass window. While you ship your object, you can ship your object using conventional shipping methods. I don't recommend that you do this because they just aren't gentle enough, and your object can get more damaged in shipment. This is something that I've seen happen. You don't want to risk it. For some things, the conservator will actually need to do the treatment on location. For example, murals or outdoor sculpture, things that you can't move. The conservator will come to you instead. After treatment, the final steps will be after treatment photography and documentation, including a treatment report, which outlines the materials and methods used in the treatment. This is permanent documentation, and you should retain a copy in your records. If the object ever needs to be treated again, you'll want to know exactly what happened previously. So here's a bit of a timeline to show the process for a conservation collections assessment, like a long-range preservation plan or a collections condition survey would fit in the same sort of timeline. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. After you've reached out to the conservator, you've explained what the project is, made sure that they're qualified, you've gotten a cost estimate and signed a contract, the following steps will happen. You may or may not have to start with a questionnaire conducted either over email or by phone to share some general information that will help the conservator with the context of the collection and information that they need to write the final report. They'll then travel to your site to do the assessment or the survey. An assessment typically takes 1 or 2 days, depending on the size of your site, the size of your collection, how many buildings they have to go look at. A survey timeline, also, it depends on the size of the collection and the survey method. So sometimes you need a survey of every single object. A conservator needs to take a look at every single thing. Sometimes the best survey method is actually a representative survey, and they might just be looking at samples of the materials instead of every single thing. So depending on all of those factors, a survey could take anywhere from 1 or 2 days to 1 or 2 weeks. After the site visit is over, the conservators will work on their final report. You should be able to take a look at least one draft of the report to make sure that things are progressing well and that the report looks how you expect, and you can correct any mistakes there might be about what your organization is like. And the final product of these projects will be the final report that the conservator writes. And here I've included the links to a bunch of the resources that I discussed throughout the webinar that I can always share my slides with you so that you can click on the links. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them now, or you can contact me using either of those email addresses on this slide. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope this has been helpful.
Hey, Megan, this is John. And I just was wondering if you'd noticed in the field, if the pandemic conditions have affected how conservators are working, like is it giving them more time to work, more more items to work on, or is it it's slowing down their business like anything else?
Yeah, I think that it really depends. Some people are able to do their work at a normal pace because a lot of private conservators work in sort of individual practices. So they have like a studio that they work in mostly by themselves. And so it's pretty safe for them to keep working. Other practices might have slowed down because they have to like limit the number of people who are working in a lab at a time. And the approach to doing in-person surveys and conservation assessments, my understanding is that they're still happening, but you might have to have fewer people involved in being there during the assessment, and there might be other safety precautions that they request.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Looks like I have a question. The question is, If you could bring a collection to a conservator for them to assess, and the answer is probably yes, unless it's really big and they would need a lot of storage space for it. A smaller collection of things you could probably bring to a conservator. You would just, of course, need to check with them beforehand.